Today, we're going to dive into the ultimate guide on how to waste time. Buckle up as we unfold the secrets to ensure your study sessions are as inefficient as possible. Let's shuffle through these game-changing tactics together and discover the 5 cardinal sins of poker study habits that are guaranteed to prevent you from making progress. Because why aim for improvement when you can master the craft of standing still? Let's dive in. Tip number 1, memorize frequencies. The most efficient way to waste your time studying poker is to try and memorize GTO frequencies. So I want you to keep in mind that there are billions and billions of decision points in poker, and so your goal is to try and rote memorize all of that. If you can't do that, how can you even call yourself a GTO wizard? You need to know exactly how often each hand takes each action in every spot. And whatever you do not try to extrapolate larger ideas. Do not look for the bigger picture. Just focus on memorizing frequencies without understanding the strategy. That is how you will stand still. Tip number 2 for wasting your time is to justify your spew. When you look at a solver, you shouldn't be thinking about what your range is doing. You should not be focusing on the overall strategy. Instead, you should review your hands, look at only your hand in the solution, and if it happens at any frequency, good enough, right? Focus on how your hand is supposed to play, ignore your range. And hey, if you get coolered taking some wild line, just justify it by calling it a low frequency play. That is how solvers were meant to be used. Tip number 3, focus on minutia. If you want to make the least amount of progress possible, it is crucial that you spend hours studying tiny blocker effects and trying to figure out why calling is 0.01 big blinds better than raising. You should definitely spend all day trying to figure out why the solver raises 1.5% of the time in this river spot with this very strange combination. Ignore threshold analysis, don't do any global takeaways, only focus on these minutia, and that will ensure that you waste the maximum amount of time studying. Tip number 4, wander aimlessly. Do not try and prioritize spots. Do not try and figure out what spots are more important to study. Just study random hands. You need to avoid developing some sort of study plan at all costs. That will only help your progress. If you want to stagnate in poker, study routines are the enemy. Do not let yourself fall in the trap of studying on a regular basis without going crazy. Tip number 5 is confirmation bias. You already know how poker ought to be played. There's nothing left for you to learn. You should use the solver to confirm your own worldview rather than trying to learn new concepts. And hey, you know what? If the solver disagrees with your play, it's probably not worth paying attention to. Make sure that you use the solver exclusively to feed your ego rather than try and learn new concepts. Okay, so you've learned the 5 cardinal sins of studying poker. Let's snap back to reality and assume that you actually want to improve and not waste your time. I'm going to go through some GTO Wizard examples, and I'll show you the right way and the wrong way to study different spots. All right, so hijack opens, cut off 3 bets. They call, flop is 9-7-5 two-tone, and it checks to you in position. Now, let's say you're studying this spot. The least efficient way to study it would be to mouse over each of these combinations individually. Ace-9, what is Ace-9 doing? Okay, we're checking 37.9% of the time. We're betting small a lot. Sometimes we're betting medium. Okay, but what about Ace-10? Ace-Jack, Ace-Queen, 10s, Jacks. Like, guys, this takes forever. It's not a super efficient way to go. Ultimately, if you want to study more efficiently, you need to start with big circles and work your way down to smaller circles. So big circles is like the big picture analysis. And then only once you've got a handle on that, do you work your way down to the smaller combinatorial stuff. The easiest way to do that is to use this filters tab. I love the filters tab. And the reason I like this is because it allows me to start thinking of hands in terms of hand classes, grouping similar hands together. So for example, if I select sets, now my strategy at the top shows just my strategy for sets, and you can see they're mostly betting. I can do this for any type of hand class or draw, or any combination thereof. Again, the idea is to minimize the amount of stuff you have to think about so that you're getting more for your study time. We're trying to group strategically similar spots together, strategically similar hands together, and try and take away as much information as possible with the least amount of time. Now, let's say you want to study turns, cut off bets, hijack calls, and what most people do is they'll just enter a single turn card here, perhaps the turn card that was played in game, but the more efficient way to study this is to start again with turn reports. If I click turn reports, hijack checks, here I can see cutoff strategy with their entire range across all these different turn cards, right? And so this is going to be the quickest way that I can gain value from my study time, because I can already develop heuristics like, okay, when the turn card brings a connecting card, like a 6, an 8, or a 10 here, I should probably slow down quite a lot. Meanwhile, I can start overbetting on some of these board pairing cards and even some of these bricks. And I should probably be pretty aggressive on these Broadway cards, Jack, Queen, or King. Something does pique my interest though. Why are we slowing down so much on an ace? After all, we're the 3-better. That's odd. Let's go check the ranges. I'm going to go back to cutoff's range. Again, going to use this filters tab to filter for ace high. And we'll notice that most of the ace high are checking 63% of the time. What that means is that when you bet, you don't have these hands in range, and therefore an ace isn't actually that good for you. Another way you can use this, imagine you're studying some particular hand in game. Let's say you had jacks here, for example. What you can do is you can filter the turn reports for just this hand. And instead of studying the exact turn card that came in game, you can use these reports to study how jacks should play across all of these different turn cards. And again, we can see very similar heuristics. A 7 and a 9. Okay, we can even start overbetting on this. An overcard to the jack. Okay, now we're slowing down a lot. I've done a lot of other videos on studying more efficiently, but you guys get the idea. The goal is to start with big picture analysis and work your way down, rather than trying to memorize individual hands as a lot of newer players would. All right, so we've addressed number 1. Now let's address number 2, justify your spew. Again, one of the cardinal sins of studying is to focus on how your hand is supposed to play rather than your range. And if you make a mistake, but the solver is taking this line at some minute frequency, you just say, oh, it's a low frequency play. It's fine. Guys, that's not how you should use a solver. You shouldn't use it to justify bad play. Just because it's taken at some frequency doesn't necessarily mean your strategy was any good. Let me show you what I mean. All right, let me demonstrate this cardinal sin to you guys. Imagine you're reviewing a hand history, and in this spot, you had ace-3 of spades as the cutoff. You bet 1/3 pot, they call. On the turn, you think to yourself, hey, you know what? I've just hit top pair. They've got lots of draws that'll probably call me. Let me put in another bet. You bet and they get called. River's the 9 of hearts. And here you decide to go all in with ace-3. You look at the solver and you realize, oh, okay, it's mostly checking this hand, but you know what? It's shoving at a low frequency. We'll call this a low frequency play. Move on, nothing more to see here, right? Meanwhile, if you actually normalize your range, you'll notice you never get here with ace-3. What actually matters isn't necessarily what ace-3 is doing here in a vacuum. It's how you're constructing your overall betting shoving frequency. This informs the exploitability of your strategy. Let's imagine that ace-3 shoves here. What actually happens? Well, let's examine what calls you. So quads, full houses, flushes, straights, trips, and better top pair. Okay, so the majority of hands that call you have you beat. So is this really a value bet? I mean, maybe you get like a merge call from some jacks and 10s. I don't know if many humans find that. What about folding? Okay, well, you fold out hands you beat, such as low pairs, low pairs, low pairs, and you actually fold out a few better top pairs, interestingly enough. So you were maybe just overplaying your hand, thinking, yeah, it's a value bet. In reality, you were bluffing without even knowing it, right? And unless you stop to actually analyze your strategy, you won't notice that. And you'll just continue on playing the same way, overplaying your top pair in these types of spots. The third cardinal sin, focusing on minutia. And I see this all the time in the Discord server, on the public forums. People are not paying attention to what actually matters and spending too much time focusing on what basically comes down to solver noise or inconsequential blocker effects. Returning to our river example, imagine you get here with 6-5 of clubs and you decide to turn your hand into a bluff and shove. good for you. But you'll notice that it's bluffing with 6-5 of spades, 6-5 of hearts, and it's checking with 6-5 of clubs. In the summary tab, we can even see that the EV, when you have spades, is much higher than the EV when you don't have spades. What's going on here? What is this to do with spades? Is this like something important? Guys, I've done more card removal analysis in my life than anyone should do. If you actually go and calculate how holding each of these suits changes your opponent's frequencies, it's minute. It's not even a consideration. It's not worth thinking about at all. This does not matter, even a little bit. This is not important. Here's a blocker effect that does matter. Let's take a look at King Queen here. In the summary tab, you'll notice that King Queen of diamonds is bluffing. King Queen without a diamond is not bluffing, simply because you block the flush, right? That's as simple as you really need. A lot of the stuff, a lot of the times that you're spending on figuring out why one suit does this, why the other suit does that, first of all, the effect is much smaller than you think it is. Secondly, it's built on range assumptions that are not realistic by the river. That is to say, like 3.7 big blind gain here is based on assumptions that aren't realistic about your opponent's range. In reality, there's so much more variance to their range that this is just basically goes out the window. Thirdly, it's not important, right? Spending a bunch of time trying to figure out like which combination of 6-5 is the best one to bet, or 7-6, it doesn't matter. What matters here is your overall range construction, your value to bluff ratio for this shove. That matters a lot. What doesn't matter is how often you're bluffing or what combinations you're bluffing with this particular hand that you rarely ever get here with. Now, similarly, let's say you shove and you're studying the opponent's response here. And you might ask, well, why is it that ace-5 of spades calls more often than ace-5 of hearts? And again, the answer is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. I promise you that the card removal effects are so negligible, this isn't even a real consideration. Look, don't get me wrong, there are times where blocker effects are important and have a big impact on your real EV. This is not one of those times at all. The only takeaway when you hold ace-5 here is that your hand is indifferent. That's the only consideration here, right? Your hands, the expected value of calling and folding are both 0. Your hand's right on the line, and you should decide whether or not to call, not based on your suits, but rather based on your opponent's tendencies, if you think they're maybe over-bluffing or under-bluffing in this line. And that's going to be true for basically all of your top pair. They're all indifferent facing this. Again, my advice is to not focus on these minute blocker effects, but rather overall range construction, things like what hand class is appropriate to shove here, right? So when cutoff shoves, they're mostly representing flushes, full houses, and quads for value. They're very rarely representing anything worse than a flush for value. Returning to number 4, wandering aimlessly. This one's really common. It's really easy to just study random spots when you feel like it and have basically no plan, preparation, or sense of priority. But it's a very inefficient way to study. You can imagine you learn little bits and pieces, but you're not trying to pick the lowest fruit first. You're not maximizing your study time. Now, instead of studying random spots, you can use one of the many free resources we have on GTO Wizard to study more efficiently. For example, you can open up these study plans and try the Mastering the Basics of GTO. This is a free study plan open to anyone with a GTO Wizard account. It's filled with articles, guides, videos, as well as many drills that will teach you all about how to start studying in poker and how to master the basics of a game theory optimal strategy. You can also watch some of my previous content where I've shown you how we can use math to break down what the most important formations are and what the most important textures are. This is, again, just a nice simple way to prioritize the most important spots first and develop an actual quantifiable system for what spots you should be studying first. Lastly, confirmation bias. Now, I don't have a GTO Wizard example for this because it's more psychological, but let's take a look at the ironic slide. You already know how poker ought to be played, and you use the solver to confirm your own worldview rather than trying to learn new concepts. And if it disagrees with you, it's not worth paying attention to, just feed your ego. This is subconsciously how a lot of people study. I think in particular, this is a common trap that regs fall into. These are people who have studied, have perhaps found a slightly winning strategy, and then they just get stuck, right? They start playing the same way in the same spots without ever reassessing their strategy. And mostly what they're using a solver for that point on, is just fine-tuning a very break-even strategy rather than trying to learn new ideas. Again, it's not very efficient. When you see an outlier hand in GTO Wizard, when you see the solver doing something doesn't make sense to you, is outside your worldview, don't just dismiss it as, oh, it's crazy GTO nonsense. There's a reason for that. And if your opponent, if you think that's weird, it's probably because there's a deeper strategic idea that you haven't thought of before, that perhaps is actually applicable, not necessarily the play, but the underlying concept. If you can't look for ways to improve your strategy, well, you're just going to plateau. And that's why it's really important to keep an open mind and remember that poker is far more complex than you give it credit for. All right, everyone, that's my video. Let me know down below what bad study habits you're going to break after watching this video. And if you found it helpful, if you found it useful, the best way you can thank me is to like and subscribe. That's all for now. Happy grinding.